Omande share me nyina akwa badeba Kantona TV so. Sene Kantona TV ahye mo bosa bena benya nsɛm bi edi candidate ni Kantona TV. Yama won so nsi ebabawura nsɛm no de nsɛm nya betumanu sa pepe ne ye no. Se nyina ye nim sɛ sene ye nyina ye nim sɛ oman ni masi aye den na sisi a ye ntimi ento bibia bo aye den. Enam saa yen so ma ekuo bi a abren na benya so makasa editia oman no yi di ho efom Action Aid International na ahwe so de program yi ahyehye so a ne nyina e kire sɛ aban no betimi ahwe ama niema bi a asanse bi te sɛ ɛtoɔ anaasɛ bi a omokɔgye bosia fi IMF a omode nhyehyɛ atwabrembo de to ye so no aban no betimi ahwe na oye ho hyehyɛ se ne be ya temamofo a ye wo man mu so ye ho betimi aheha ye nkanka ne nkura ne mma nso ye nso ye ho betimi aheha ye na bra dwumadie ne ekoso no ye ne acting head of program Margaret Brew edi nkomo na sei na oreto nsentwerefo ni.
Over the years, many countries in Africa have had relationships with the IMF, and it comes with the same policy prescriptions. And these policy prescriptions limit the fiscal space for countries or governments to invest in the needed public services that will bring about gender equality. And these countries include Ghana. Action Aid invested in this research in Ghana and other countries, and the findings show that currently, as of 2016, between the past 5 years, without 2021, from 2016 to 2020, governments spend more on interest payments and debt servicing than invest in education and health. And when it comes to education and health, these are key public services that are needed by women and persons living in poverty to bring about transformation in their lives. Provision of education, for instance, provision of child care centers will relieve women of the burden of child care work, and they will have enough time to engage in economic activities. Without a provision of health care, women and girls will have to take up the provision of services or care services, caring for sick persons, elderly and aged persons, sacrificing their economic activities, sacrificing education. Without the provision of water, women and girls will have to spend a number of hours in a day collecting water for their household. With the advent of COVID-19, it brought a lot of burden on women and girls who were in the house collecting water because COVID required the regular washing of hands. So it meant that the number of hours women and girls spent on collecting water had increased. And this is where we need public service to come in. And access to public service is also a human rights issue. Ghana as a country has signed on to various UN conventions, and in fact, the issue of unpaid care work and domestic work is one of the targets under the SDG Goal 5. So it means the state will have to provide the needed public services to ensure that the burden of care and domestic work on women and girls is drastically reduced to ensure gender equality. We are in this with our collaborators, Education International and Public Services International, including other CSOs. We collaborate with governments to provide the options or propose alternatives to fiscal consolidation and all the IMF austerities. We are saying that it is time to end austerity measures. In this COVID era, we encourage our Minister of Finance and all African Ministers of Finance to come together and renegotiate the terms of IMF conditionalities. In the short term, suspend interest payments. In the medium to long term, reschedule all these interest payments and debt servicing so that they will get the needed resources to engage more public sector workers, invest more in public services to provide the quality public services needed in this country and other African countries.
Ewie nso anso ho a Professor Eric Osei Asibe ɔyɛ researcher ɛwɔ University of Ghana Legon ɔno nso de se ɛna source.
Like I mentioned, there's enough evidence to support the fact that investment in human capital, especially in education, is highly correlated with long-term sustainable growth of any economy. As we often cite South Korea and others, they took a decision at the point to spend heavily on education. And today we are cashing in on the revenue and then the returns from such investments. And so what this study is seeking to do is that government will reprioritize these gender responsive social services, prioritizing education, making sure that they hire more people to ensure quality education, provision of educational facilities and all of that, and so that in the end we'll be able to provide education to the vast majority of our people. When we do that, we are able to sustain our economic growth, and we are able to ensure that our development and our growth is much more inclusive, right? It's going to bring everybody on board, because once you are well educated, you always will find a way of fending for yourself, and it is the surest way of breaking away from poverty. And you need the human capital to be able to produce at a much more higher rate. To increase productivity means that you need to invest in the people's health. And so we are saying that government should prioritize education and find ways of cutting down on debt accumulation so that interest payments will reduce and channel the money into gender responsive social services, education, healthcare provision, social protection, sanitation, and water. These things are critical for our society. It will mean that government has to, over time, reduce the fiscal deficits, and how that government reduce the fiscal deficit will mean that government has to, find much smarter way of increasing tax revenue, right? Because the revenue yield has to increase, has to widen the tax base, has to ensure that a lot more of our people pay tax. And we have often said that we need to expand tax nets into the informal sector. And the reason being that the informal sector forms about 80 to 85% of our economic activity, and many of them do not pay tax, which means that it's difficult for government to get the money to provide for all these services that we're talking about. The only way for government to be able to continually provide for these gender responsive social services will be to borrow. But borrowing is not a way to go. Like you're saying now, for this year budget, government is going to commit about 37 billion Ghana cedis in servicing debt and interest payments alone. This 37 billion is more than a quarter of all the expenditures. It is about 55% of our tax revenue. It means that all the taxes that we collect, about 55% of it goes into paying debts that have been accumulated in the past. Right. This money can be channeled into areas that will have direct benefit to the people, education and healthcare. So we are saying that government should, increase effort in mobilizing revenue that will lead to reducing the fiscal deficit, and by so doing, reducing the debt burden, and then reducing interest payment and free resources for investment into social sectors of the economy.
Ɛda mu nyinaa mo ase sɛ mo agye mmerɛ ahwɛ Kantona TV. Kantona TV yɛka deɛ ɛwɔ.